This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Equals for Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against West Ham by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man and match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson and Christian Benteke after the game. So let's begin. Palace picked up their first ever point at a London stadium as Christian Benteke netted for the second time this season to earn a draw against West Ham United. In a game that won't live long in their memory, Roy Hodgson's team took the lead when the Belgian striker connected with Hernandez Townsend cross in 24 minutes, but 3 minutes before half time the host levelled for a Mark Noble penalty, ensuring a share of the spoils in East London. A shaky opening 10 minutes from the visitors allowed Murrow to scuff wide early into his league debut, and only a fantastic large-ditch sliding challenge by James Tomkins prevented Hernandez from firing home the opener after a sandbar cross found its way into the Mexican marksman's path. But whilst it took 24 minutes to arrive, the Eagles' first opportunity was well worth the wait. Andros Townsend received a Luka Milivojevic pass from the halfway line and charged goalwards, teasing Declan Rice as he edged closer. Finding an extra yard of pace, he then went past a young defender and stood up a cross that was begging to be attacked, and Benteke obliged by diving in a powerful header past the helpless Adrian to net his second of the campaign. A quiet first half, then saw Robongaho head over from a corner before Milivojevic blasted wide. But the game's disjointed nature wasn't helped by a strange 4-minute delay that saw Bakary Sakho injured in a challenge with Pablo Zabaleta, receive lengthy treatment and then immediately go back straight down upon his reintroduction, leading to his early withdrawal. The stoppage seemed to affect Palace's rhythm, and moments later they found themselves level after West Ham grabbed their way back into the contest in 43 minutes. Unlike his previous challenge on Hernandez, this time Tomkins mistimed his attempt and brought down the striker to concede a penalty against his former side, allowing Mark Noble to send Wayne Hennessy the wrong way from 12 yards. During 6 minutes of first half stoppage time, Townsend forced Adrian into a sprawling stop before James McArthur nodded just wide, and Milivojevic was narrowly off target with a powerful rifling shot from the edge of the box with the final action, but the Eagles couldn't quite restore their advantage before the break. And it was only thanks to a fine reaction save by Hennessy that things remained that way 5 minutes after the restart. Murrow found Byron on the right, who put in a cross onto the head of Hernandez, but despite being at point blank range, the Welshman managed to push it away to safety. But as the rain began to pour, the second half quickly became a damp squib, with both teams lacking moments of quality to seriously trouble either goalkeeper. A tame patch of an out free kick and a wild blast over the bar by Rice were the only chances of a dull second 45, which was littered with sloppy concessions of passing combined with a lack of attacking thrust from both sides, meaning the game petered out to its conclusion. Now for some stats from the game. Possession, 40% West Ham, 60% Crystal Palace. Shots, 8 for West Ham and 9 for Crystal Palace. Shots on target, 3 for Palace and 3 for West Ham. Corners, 5 for West Ham and 3 for Palace. And fouls, 11 for West Ham and 15 for Palace. Andros Townsend's cross for Benteke's goal was his 5th assist of the season, his best ever return in the Premier League campaign. The tricky winger has been directly involved in 5 goals in his last 6 Premier League games for the Eagles, with 1 goal and 4 assists in that time. Crystal Palace have failed to keep a clean sheet in each of their last 13 Premier League London derbies away from home, last recording a shutout in December 2014 against QPR. Christian Benteke has scored 25 headed goals in the Premier League since his debut in September 2012. Only Giroud, 27, has scored more in this period. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at @CrystalPalace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions, share your opinions with other fans, and much like a forum, it's also a great place to upload videos, photos, and any news articles you've found which do relate to Palace, and of course do feel free to share them in the Facebook group. So like I've said there, really just to summarise, if you are someone who likes to share your opinion or likes to read and have discussions about what other people are saying, then of course do head over to the Facebook group and do join it, because obviously it is a great place for you not only to read what others are saying, but also a great place for you to express your opinion as well. And we do regularly keep it up to date along with the Twitter and Facebook accounts. We do regularly keep it up to date with all the latest news, so if you do want to keep up to date with all things Palace, then of course do feel free to join the group, but also do feel free to follow our pages at eCrystalPalace. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, rating the players' performances from 1 to 10, with obviously 10 being the best. And even if you don't want to do that and you don't want to comment with your player ratings, then do feel free to comment below with your views of the game. You know, whether you're a West Ham fan or whether you're a Palace fan, do comment below your thoughts of the game, whether you thought it was a penalty. You know, did you think a draw was a fair result? You know, which do you think Benteke's, this will kick him on now, the fact that he scored a goal? So anything like that, do feel free to comment that below. And even if you have any questions that you want to ask me because I didn't cover anything in the podcast, then do also feel free to drop that below as well. But the main reason I want you to do this is purely because obviously I can come back to the video and see what the listeners thought about the game and what they thought of my opinion, but also any other fans, whether they be Palace or West Ham fans, who wouldn't normally come to the channel, rather than just listening to my opinion, they can also read your comments as well to see how their opinion not only compares to mine in the podcast, but also see how their opinion also compares to other fans in the comment section. So if you are someone who not only likes to have your opinion heard, but likes to, you know, read what others are saying, then of course do feel free to leave your comments below, whether that's your views about the game or whether it's your player rating so you can compare them to mine. Do feel free to drop them below. Now, if you do want to follow any of these social media pages and join a Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, starting in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who I'm going to give a 6. Not much to do in the first half, apart from kicking the ball out of his own net from Mark Noble's penalty. Pulled off a wonderful save to stop Javier Hernandez early header in the second half. So Wayne Hennessy here, I've given him a 6, and much like what you heard in that little summary there wasn't actually much for him to do in the game. And to be honest, he's one of these players that if he has a fantastic game, it's normally because he's made 10 saves, and there's other games where actually he has a good game, and that's purely because he didn't have anything to do, but there was one save in particular which was fantastic, and this game was the latter I was just explaining there. So in terms of his performance, I think a 6 is a fair result, because really in the first half especially had nothing to do, and the only thing he did do was kick the ball out of the net for Noble's penalty. You know, Mark Noble, I think he hasn't missed a penalty for West Ham, which just shows you that because he's got such a decent record, it's highly unlikely that Hennessy's going to save it, purely because of how good Mark Noble is at penalties. So there was no chance of him saving that. So obviously that penalty's gone in. You can't really blame Hennessy for the penalty because he wasn't the one who made the foul. Obviously that was James Tomkins, so really you can't blame him for that goal, and that's all he really had to do in the first half, was take the ball out of the net. In the second half it was much similar to the first half in the fact that he didn't have much to do, but there was one absolutely fantastic, wonderful save in the second half where a ball came in from the right hand side from Byron, obviously playing on that right playing at that as right back. He whipped in a good cross on the counter attack. Javier Hernandez has attacked it, really good header, really good connection. That was early in the second half, and Wayne Hennessy, fantastic, stretching save to keep that out from Hernandez. And we all said before the game that we thought that Hernandez was going to score. Obviously he didn't score, but that was the biggest chance that Hernandez had, and because Hennessy was able to stretch and make that save, obviously we stopped that from happening. So overall I think, if you're looking at both halves of the game, you're going to be looking at the first half saying he didn't have much to do other than picking the ball out of his net, which of course wasn't his fault. And then in the second half, didn't really have to do much, but he obviously did make that wonderful save to stop Hernandez. And for that alone, you could say actually, even though he didn't do anything, for that save alone, which obviously kept the game at 1-1, that's quite important in terms of what happened in the game. Now in terms of just, an overall sort of summary of his game, I've given him a 6 because he was, it wasn't necessarily a fantastic performance, but it was an average performance with a fantastic save here and there. But in terms of, overall, I think obviously he made a couple of excellent saves which fans will remember, but the main thing they will remember about this performance is not that save from Javier Hernandez, but the time that he picked the ball up for a goal kick or throw in, or sorry, not, yeah, He basically got the ball up, went to throw it out, but it was such a poor position. So he saw he was trying to pass it out to Patrick Van Aanholt, but as he's thrown it, instead of throwing it to him, he's thrown it at the ground. So it basically bounced back at, I believe it was James Tomkins, and obviously Hennessy had to retake that throw. So really, that just shows that there are a few moments of madness with Hennessy, and the fact that sometimes he throws the ball, instead of to a player, he throws it into the ground, so it bounces back at him. You know, it's obviously, we know that he makes silly mistakes here and there, but what he can do after he put in such a good performance in terms of making that save, it would have been really horrible if that mistake had punished us. But luckily for us, it didn't. But we are going to remember this performance for the throw. And obviously, I'm recording this on the 1st of February, so after deadline day. We haven't signed a new goalkeeper, so Hennessy, we've got to survive with him till the summer now. So hopefully he cuts out these mistakes here and actually can put in a few good performances coming up. But personally for me, I think Wayne Hennessy, although he didn't have to do much in the first half, and apart from you know, that wonderful save in the second half, he didn't have to do much in that half as well. But personally for me, I do think a 6 is a fair result. Now to move on to the right back, Timothy Fosu-Mensah, who I am going to give a 6. A great block to deny a goal-bound shot 10 yards from goal in the first half. Not much of note in the second half. So Fosu-Mensah here, much like the performance of Hennessy, he wasn't actually involved that much in the game, and I think that based on that, and based on the fact that he wasn't terrible in the game and he wasn't great, I do think that a 6 is probably an average score, and I think he does deserve to get that. But in terms of one thing of note he done in the game, you know, much like Hennessy making that save, Fosu-Mensah was quiet but made this one particular block. Obviously West Ham on the attack, goal-bound shot from about 10 yards from goal, and obviously Fosu-Mensah is able to put his body on the line to block it. It was a great block, obviously kept Palace in the game, and it's key moments like that from the defence that if they're not having a good game, and this sort of applies to any player on the field really, but if they're not having a good game, if they can make a block like that which keeps the team in the game or stops the deficit from being made even bigger, if they can do that, that's great as well, because I'd much rather a player, you know, not play great but make one piece of good defending or one piece of good goalkeeping to keep us in the game, as opposed to him playing fantastic and then making loads of mistakes. So I'd rather a player have an off day but still have that one moment of class in the game, and that's basically exactly what Fosu-Mensah's and Hennessy's performances were. You know, they weren't really troubled in the game, but when called upon, they obviously made a block and a save respectively. But in terms of that, in the first half, nothing much of note in terms of other than that block. So once again, just sort of going over the fact that he was quite quiet in that half. And unlike Hennessy, where he got slightly busier in the second half in terms of making that save from Hernandez, Fosu-Mensah was the opposite, because really there was nothing really of note in the second half, and I can't really identify anything great or bad that he done in that second half, which overall just sort of sums up that actually it was a pretty average performance from him. You know, no real quality and no real bad defending there. But in terms of, you know, talking about last weekend, obviously against Arsenal, that was a complete debacle in terms of how bad it was, and obviously it wasn't just Fosu-Mensah who was bad in terms of blaming him for one of the goals, but obviously as a collective the backline was absolutely terrible. You know, in that game against Arsenal, it was, you know, debacle is the word I used to describe it. But in this game, in comparison to that, it was the complete opposite, in the fact that it was another solid showing from the fullback in terms of he made up for that bad game against Arsenal with another good performance here. And although he wasn't great, you know, it was much better, considerably better than the Arsenal game, and I think that reflected in terms of the whole backline. It wasn't just Fosu-Mensah who played better, but as a collective, I think the whole backline did play quite well. And to be honest, obviously with Joe Ward returning from injury, he now is fit again, and he's obviously on the bench. He's training hard, as you can see on the videos they post online. But I think that Fosu-Mensah, he rightly held on to his place. I don't think that just because Joe Ward's back and he was playing well before he got injured, I don't think that necessarily should mean that Joe Ward goes straight back in. And I think for me, based on the performances recently, excluding the Arsenal game, I do think that Fosu-Mensah deserves to keep his place. But if, you know, he keeps having average performances like this and Joe Ward gets given a chance and plays really well, then I don't see any reason why Fosu-Mensah couldn't be dropped, purely because they've got a bit of competition there. So hopefully the fact that they've both got competitions for that right back place, hopefully that will help them to both be very competitive and both try and get into that squad, which hopefully would up both of their performances overall. But Fosu-Mensah here, I think a 6 is a fair result. Other than, you know, that great block in the first half, there wasn't really much of note in the rest of that first half and in the second half as well. So overall, I think can't really blame him for anything that happened in the game, so overall I think a 6 is a fair result. Now to move on to the centre-back James Tomkins, who I'm going to give a 6. Outstanding challenge to deny Hernandez, which probably could have been an opening goal from 6 yards. Read the game well and was in the right place to clear any danger. Conceded a penalty which led to the equaliser, but it looked harsh initially in real time. So James Tomkins here, I've given him a 6, and much what will be, this will be quite a repeating theme in terms of the game. But overall, I've given him a 6 because once again, it was quite an average performance in the fact that he didn't do anything fantastic in the game. But overall, he wasn't necessarily at fault other than giving away the penalty. But before I go on to talk about that penalty, just to talk about another moment of class from him. So much like Fosu Mensah and Hennessy with their saves and their blocks, James Tomkins had one of his own, which obviously highlights the fact that when you're not having the best game or you're not fantastic, you can still make these moments of class, which obviously keep your team in the game. So in terms of this one, Hernandez is through on goal. It's going to be a clean strike. He's going to hit it with his right foot. And James Tomkins slides in there and manages to, it's outstanding, the challenge, but he manages to get the ball off Hernandez. So as he takes the shot, it deflects behind for a corner. An absolutely fantastic challenge from from Tomkins on Hernandez, which potentially probably would have been an opening goal from about 6 yards out quite early on in the game, and maybe like the Arsenal game we would have capitulated. So the fact that Tomkins was able to time it right, get the accuracy right, get the angle right to obviously get in the way of the shot and deflect it behind for a corner was obviously great to see as well. But the main thing I like about Tomkins' performances, and this has been sort of a reoccurring thing over the last few weeks, is the fact that how well he reads the game and the fact that he's always in the right place, whether that's to clear the danger with a hoof, whether that's to clear the danger by just passing it out from the back, or whether it's just heading the ball clear. Whatever it is, I think he reads the game really well, whether that's defending or when we're in possession as well. But in terms of the penalty here, I'm not going to talk too much about it, because for me, I'm looking back at it thinking, yes, it's a soft penalty, but Tomkins really shouldn't be diving in there. So for me, although it did look like a soft penalty, and the fact that Townsend got booked for simulation for a very similar foul, obviously it wasn't a foul, but for something very similar he was booked for. If Townsend's going to be booked for that, then surely the referee should book Hernandez for diving. If he perceives that the one that Townsend did was a dive, then surely the one in the box was also a dive as well. But I'm not going to really talk too much about it, because there was contact there, which obviously does result in a penalty. But if you look back at the replays, obviously Tomkins has gone there to try and get the ball. He gets the ball, but Hernandez stays still, and as soon as Tomkins gets the ball, as Hernandez is standing still, he then falls to the ground. So it was a very slow-mo challenge and a slow-mo reaction from Hernandez. But like I've said, Tomkins really shouldn't be, especially in the box, really shouldn't be diving in there. So really for me, I don't think we can really, say that it was a dive, purely on the fact that really shouldn't be making that challenge there. And obviously for the main fact that there was obviously contact. But I think the referee needs to improve his consistency if he thinks that Andros Townsend's dive was a dive and booked him for that, whereas Hernandez was probably on the same par, yet that one was given as a penalty. But obviously, talking about his performances recently, and obviously in this game here carrying on his form, but we know what we're going to get from him now. Every game he puts in solid performances, 6s and 7s out of 10s, and once again here he carried on his performance, which actually, the fact that he hasn't been injured recently, he's going on a fantastic run of form and actually being one of our most crucial players. At the beginning of the season, you'll look at someone like Zaha, who was carrying the team, then he got injured, came back and carried the team further. We're actually at the moment, obviously Bakary Saka's got injured now, but it looks like for me, Tomkins and Milivojevic in particular, these two players are best on form at the minute. And obviously Tomkins, he's been outstanding in the last few games, so long may it continue. But like I've said here, yes, he played fantastic in this game in terms of playing very consistently recently and carried on that form, but the only mistake in this game was giving away the penalty, because if you take the penalty away, he probably would have got a 7 out of 10, purely because of the fact that fantastic challenge on Hernandez to keep the game at 0-0 at the time, and also the fact that he was obviously in the right place and he read the game really well. So for me, I think for me, James Tomkins fully deserves a 6. Not the best performance in him in terms of giving away the penalty, but the way he read the game, I think was quite good as well. So James Tomkins here, I've given him a 6. Now to move on to the centre back Martin Kelly, who I'm going to give a 6. Good partnership with Tomkins in the first half. Got through the game, but nothing outstanding. So Martin Kelly here, much like what I said a few minutes ago in terms of the reoccurring theme in most players not having a fantastic game but being quite average in their performances. Martin Kelly was basically exactly that, and that's why I've given him the 6. Because personally for me, there was nothing of note for him. So obviously Tomkins gave away the penalty, you could highlight that. But really for me, Kelly, I can't really highlight too much about him because really his performance was overall quite good, but there's nothing outstanding from him as we've seen in recent games. But in terms of his partnership with Tomkins, I think that if we had to highlight one thing from the game, I think we could say that actually the Tomkins-Kelly partnership looks really good, and I think they complement each other really well. And obviously Mamadou Sakho's coming back from injury and he was on the bench against West Ham, but I still do think that as long as these two people keep form in terms of Kelly and Tomkins, until we get to a point where maybe Mamadou Sakho is back to his full fitness, I don't see a reason why we should change our partnership because it's working quite well at the minute. But like I've already mentioned, a few moments ago, in terms of getting through the game, I thought he got through the game really well and he wasn't really at fault for anything, and it was a sort of an unspectacular performance from him. But that's the thing you want about performances, about players. You want players who can perform really well in terms of just keeping average performances, and this is exactly what we saw from Martin Kelly here. He done what he had to do defensively, and although he didn't do anything outstanding, he got through the game and done what he was meant to do. But to be honest, you could argue that he did struggle again in terms of the physicality of maybe the West Ham forward. So the fact that Hernandez, you might have struggled in that battle, and obviously with the return of Mamadou Sakho onto the bench, making his way back from fitness, maybe you could say that actually maybe Martin Kelly, because he's been playing quite well recently as opposed to at the beginning of the season when he was hardly playing, getting thrown in and playing loads of games, maybe that's affected him. Maybe he's getting a bit tired. But personally for me, I've seen a few people highlight that point, that's why I put it in there. Some people said that he thought he struggled again, and that's obviously likely to highlight the fact that Mamadou Sakho may be ready to come back because he's on his way back to full fitness. But personally for me, I don't really agree with that point, but the fact that I've seen a few people debate the fact that Martin Kelly arguably, you could say, struggled, not necessarily a lot in the game, but he struggled at a few points. Maybe you could say that maybe it is time for Mamadou Sakho to come in, because yes, Martin Kelly's been a great servant in the last sort of month or so. He's played fantastic, but maybe it's time just to bring Mamadou Sakho back in, just so obviously they can form the Tomkins and Sakho partnership, which was also so good last season. But also we've got some important games coming up, and I think that influence of Mamadou Sakho, what he brings to the side, could obviously help us there. But in terms of Martin Kelly's performance, it was an unspectacular performance. But in terms of his partnership with Tomkins, I think that was really good. So personally for me, I think a 6 is a fair result. Now to move on to the left back, Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 6. He had a good first half. Solid but also agile and was in the right place. Second half not at fault from much. So Patrick Van Aanholt here, I've given him a 6, and much like what this reoccurring theme is throughout the whole game, and basically most of the players here, Patrick Van Aanholt had a really average performance, nothing really of note in the game, and nothing really at fault. So really I think a 6 is a fair result, right bang in the middle. But in terms of his first half performance, I thought he was good in that first half. One of our better players in terms of helping the attacks and actually getting back and playing quite deep to defence. So I think he done both attack and defence really well. And in terms of, talking about his overall play, I think he was quite solid and agile, and he was always in the right place. And that's something which people have questioned about him. Definitely at the beginning of the season and last season, the fact that is he actually that good defensively? But actually I thought in this game here against West Ham, he always seemed to be in the right place. So actually maybe Roy Hodgson is starting to get his positioning even better. But overall, I think that actually a good first half, and if you're looking at the game overall, I think that that he was solid in the first half, carried that on into the second, and in the second half as well. Just to talk about that, nothing really of note in that game or that half of the game. And obviously he wasn't at fault for much in that half either. So really for me, he had a really good first half, was probably one of our more positive attacking players, and he was quite solid and agile, and obviously had the good positioning. Obviously in the second half, he wasn't as great in terms of having as much influence, but I still do think he wasn't at fault for anything, which you've got to give him credit for, because really that just shows actually, even though not all of the attacks came down his side, it showed that he defended quite well. But in terms of just summing up his overall performance, I've seen quite a few people put him forward for the Man of the Match award. I totally do agree in terms of not necessarily him winning it, but I think he should be up there with some recognition for his performance, because once again it was a good performance from him. Obviously with Jeffrey Schlupp out injured now, he's obviously had to step up, and I do think that he's actually stepped up quite well, and hopefully long may, like with Tomkins' form, like with Kelly's form, long may this this sort of run of form continue, because at the moment he's playing well offensively and defensively, so as long as that continues, obviously he'd help the team out and hopefully propel us up the table. But personally for me, overall, I think a 6 is a fair result. Good first half. In the second half, wasn't at fault for anything. So overall, a good performance from him, and obviously one of the contenders for the Man of the Match award. Now to move on to the midfielder and captain Luka Milivojevic, who I am going to give a 6. Booked after just 4 minutes. Went for goal from 25 yards out, but went well wide. Read the game well though in his holding midfield position. Had another effort from long range that went narrowly over. Not much to say about his second half performance. So Luka Milivojevic here, I've given him a 6, and like what I've been what I keep repeating for all of the players, it was another average performance from him, and that was sort of a reoccurring theme across the whole team. But in terms of the main thing about his game was the fact that he got booked within 4 minutes, and I think that seemed to affect his game, not necessarily in a negative way. It just meant that he had to be more careful with all the tackles and challenges he made throughout the game. So normally we know he likes to get quite physical with the attackers, with midfielders, but obviously in this game, because he obviously had that early caution, he had to be quite careful with what he did. And I still thought that although he obviously had to be careful, I still thought that in that holding midfield role, I thought he'd done a great job of not only giving protection to the back four, but also when we had our fewer counter-attacks, he was quite good at starting them up and spreading the ball out wide as well. But in terms of the 2 chances he had on goal, these were both in the first half. One of them was obviously a shot from about 25 yards out. It went went well wide. It didn't look like it was going to go in. So obviously he's tried his luck from there. Obviously it wasn't really going to go in anyway, so we can't really expect much there. But then obviously a few moments later he has another effort from long range. This one was much more accurate. Looked like it could have been going in, but obviously this one, compared to the other one which went into the stand and well wide, actually this one went narrowly over and actually could have been a goal for Palace, which obviously would have I think it would have probably at that point would have got us 2-0 up in the game. So really for me, I think that actually it's great that he's now starting to not only play that defensive midfield role, holding midfield, and he's not only just protecting the back four, he's now also adventuring forward, and a few chances he obviously gets on goal, he's taking them, and he's showing that actually his long shot skills are actually pretty decent. So for me, it's great to see Luka's position changing. Obviously we know he's a fantastic defensive midfielder, but if he can now play slightly further forward, still give him protection to the back four, but can also use these long shot skills, hopefully they will come to good effect, because at the minute he's on 6 goals, one of Palace's top scorers this season, which just shows that not only is he good defensively, but also he's got he's obviously got fantastic penalty taking skills, but also he has got a fantastic foot when it comes to taking long shots. But in terms of his second half performance, so obviously them 2 shots and the fact that he got booked was all in the first half. In the second half, wasn't really much of note, so I'm not really going to say too much there. And to be honest, just going back to the fact that he got booked, it was almost as if he sort of played the remainder of the game walking on a tightrope. But I thought, like I've mentioned already, I thought he dealt with it really well, because obviously he's got that sort of weight on his shoulders in terms of he doesn't want to get sent off because he's the captain, obviously because he's got booked quite early on, so he had to be quite careful with his challenges. But I still think it showed what a great leader he is, the fact that he didn't let that affect him, and obviously dealt with it really well in the circumstances. Because watching the first sort of few minutes of the game where Palace weren't really getting into the game, it did look like that actually he may end up getting sent off, but he managed to compose himself and obviously still put in a good job there. So from the captain here, Luka Milivojevic, obviously he was booked within the first 4 minutes, which isn't ideal. Had two shots on goal, which obviously one went over, one went narrowly wide. And overall, I thought that in that holding midfield role, he done a really great job. And in terms of being the captain, I thought he also done a great job of leading the team out again. So Luka Milivojevic here, I think a 6 is a fair result. Now to move on to James McArthur, who I am going to give a 5. Put his foot in when needed. Good energy as normal in the first half. Second half was not as good. So James McArthur is one of these players that is probably the anomalies in terms of the performances of the whole team in this game, purely because most of the teams it was quite a reoccurring theme in terms of they were just they weren't necessarily lackluster, but they were just quite average in the game, whereas James McArthur was one of these players you probably could describe as lackluster, and that's why I've given him a 5. But in terms of the good things about his game, which I suppose I'll have to highlight first, in terms of putting a foot in when needed, having good energy, in the first half, particularly obviously to try and put pressure on West Ham. Yes, he done that alright, but much like the game against Arsenal, because we were getting overrun in midfield, I thought that McArthur, even though he was playing out wide, when he was drifting in and out, he obviously didn't have that much influence in the game. And really, it was almost as if we were playing with one less man, purely because McArthur wasn't really playing up to his standards, because we know how good he can be, but in this game, it was a slightly lower performance from him. Not to say that maybe he's just a little bit off form at the minute, but I still do think that maybe give him a few games rest on the bench, bring back Kabay, who obviously came off the bench and done alright, and just give, McArthur a slight rest, and hopefully he can come back into the team fresh again. But in terms of this game here, I've given him a 5 because it was a under par performance. And in terms of the first half, you could say that was his better half, and you probably could give him a 6 for the first half. But the second half was not as good as the first half, although the first half wasn't great from him. And personally for me, I thought that brought him down to a 5, purely because we know how good he can be. And although he tried to put his foot about as much as he could, the fact that we lost that midfield battle and the fact that he was getting overrun and was misplacing passes left, right and centre, I do think that a 5 is a fair result based on his performance. But to be honest, I think you could compare him to Kelly in the fact that you could argue that Kelly had a poor performance. But to be honest, the fact that we've now got players, new signings coming in, we've got players coming back from injury, well, hopefully they're coming back from injury, obviously that's going to put his position under threat. And personally for me, although Roy Hodgson has said that the two of our new signings, Rakip and Yak, he said that they'll probably be still getting used to English football and they'll be out, or they won't be in the starting 11 for a few weeks, maybe the start of March. But I personally think for me, based on what I've seen of Rakip, I think that Rakip looks more than ready, and I think we should throw him in at a deep end, because if McArthur's not playing well and say Kabay's legs are going and he can't last the whole game, then I don't see any reason why Rakip couldn't come into the side, because he looks like a good prospect, and actually he's a box-to-box midfielder, he describes himself as, so actually could do that McArthur role really well. But in terms of McArthur's performances here, unlike the rest of the team where they had sort of average performance, 6 out of 10s, I think that McArthur was slightly under par, and I think that's why, personally for me, that's why I've given him a 5. Yes, he did put his foot in when needed, and he had, good energy in the game. And although his first half was alright, his second half was much lower, and for me that's what really brought his rating down. So James McArthur here, not the best performance, but hopefully with his position being put under threat, hopefully that can improve his performances in the coming weeks. Now to move on to the winger, Andros Townsend, who I am going to give a 7. A good run and then a pinpoint delivery for Benteke to open the scoring in the first half. Quite second half though. So Andros Townsend here, I've given him a 7, and as you've probably heard in the other players in the starting 11, Andros Townsend, the fact that I've given him a 7 as opposed to a 6 and a 5, which I've given quite a lot of the other players, it shows that probably Andros Townsend was one of our best players. And certainly for me, the reason I've given him a 7 is the fact that I thought he was one of the players who was really up for the game and actually had an influence on the game, and I'll go on to talk about that later. But in terms of, I suppose I'll talk about his influence now actually, before I go on to talk about other things. And in terms of what he'd done in the games, obviously he was a constant attacking threat, using his pace and obviously his crossing ability to get at West Ham. That was obviously great to see, and it's great to see him thrown in at the deep end after coming back from injury, and I thought they had a good influence there. Obviously he played against Arsenal, he was on the bench against Arsenal, played here, and I thought that once again he had a great impact. But in terms of the thing he done in the game, which is the main thing and the main reason which bumped his score up to a 7, is the fact that he obviously got the assist for Benteke's goal. So in terms of that, it was a great counter-attack from Palace. So obviously Milivojevic spreading the ball to Townsend on the halfway line, Townsend making a run at Rice, I believe it was. Fantastic powerful run, managed to get the better of him for pace, managed to get in behind him, put a lovely pinpoint cross in front of goal, and obviously Benteke was fantastic delivery for him, pinpoint delivery, and obviously Benteke was able to head home. So it was great for Townsend obviously to get that assist. And if you look back at the stats from the last 6 games, in the last 6 games Andros Townsend has been involved in 5 goals. So he's obviously our top assister, and also he's obviously got a goal in that time. So if you look back at the stats, I think it's in 6 games he's got he's been involved in 5 goals, so I think it's 1 goal and 4 assists, which just actually shows that actually he's one of the most important players for us in terms of not only getting chances for himself, i.e. the 1 goal, but also he's looking to supply teammates. And like I've said already, the fact that he's got, in the last 6 games, he's got 4 assists and 1 goal is showing that actually he's one of these players, alongside the likes of Tomkins and Milivojevic, who are actually in form at the minute. But in contrast, I think his second half performance was slightly, not necessarily slightly worse, but he didn't have as much impact and energy as he did in the first half, but the fact that he made so much influence in the first half in terms of getting that assist was obviously great to see, and that sort of really just, you know, sums up his performance. The fact that, yes, he may not have been so good in the second half, but he got the job done. He done what he had to do in the first half. But like I've already mentioned, it was obviously great to see him return from injury. You know, if you watched my preview, I personally didn't predict him to start the game, so it was a surprise for me when I saw him in starting 11. But obviously Roy Hodgson obviously has watched him in training, seen that he's back to full fitness, and actually I think that he came into the side here and it showed that we had been missing a bit of his firepower in the last few games. But obviously, you know, in comparison to other games, having Townsend on the pitch gave us a little bit of a different dimension out wide, something which we haven't been used to recently. So we've been playing with, you know, Sacco, MacArthur, Wilf out wide, but given Townsend there, it gives us a more sort of direct winger, someone who could run to the byline, cross the ball in, someone with just raw pace alongside Wilf. And actually I think that the fact that we've been missing that in the last few games, it actually did show in this game here against West Ham that actually how much we did miss it. And obviously it's great to see him back from injury, but towards the end of the game he took a knock, which obviously will mean he'll be a doubt for Sunday's game. So personally for me, I think it looked like an ankle or a head injury. I think it was probably an ankle injury and he was just holding his head. But it didn't look, I'm not going to speculate, and obviously Roy Hodgson said that obviously Bakary Sakho's injury it could be severe, but Townsend, the fact that he had an ankle injury a few weeks ago and recovered in 10 days, hopefully it's the same case here where he's just taken a knock, maybe just a sprained ankle, and hopefully he can run it off and recover in training to play on Sunday. But he is one of the players who could be missing, and obviously we'll find out in the press conference on Friday whether he is available. But personally for me, if he is injured, it would be a big loss for us in terms of how much influence he's had recently, and he's obviously just been injured. Personally for me, I think that actually looking at the injury in comparison to Bakary Sakho's, I think that it was only a knock, and actually hopefully he'll be fine for Sunday. But Andros Townsend here, I've given him a 7. Although his second half was quite quiet, he actually got the job done in the first half, obviously with his powerful running and crossing, and obviously he did get that. He made a fantastic run from the halfway line to set up Christian Benteke for the opening goal. Obviously fantastic run in terms of getting in behind the defence, and once again a good cross like he always does to Benteke to easily for him to head in. So really for me, Andros Townsend at 7, one of our best players on the day. Now to move on to the winger Bakary Sakho, who I'm going to give a 6. A few moments from the left footer, including one dangerous cross and a couple of through balls in the game. Hobbled off injured though. So Bakary Sakho here, I've given him a 6, and much like all of the players in this game, bar a few, I thought that Bakary Sakho had another average performance. You know, reason I've given him a 6 is because of that. And actually, you know, this is purely because he didn't do anything great in the game. And obviously, when you consider he's been quite good recently in terms of his form, it was obviously a surprise to see him not play as well as he has done recently. But in terms of a few moments of quality in the game, you know, obviously he's left-footed and there are a few fantastic balls coming off that powerful left foot. There was one in particular which was a dangerous cross in from that left-hand side, and then there were a couple of runs and through balls that he put in occasionally, but overall he didn't really have that much influence as he has done in past games, and that's the main reason I've given him a 6. And obviously the disappointing thing is the fact that he's picked up form now. He's now consistently playing in the first team, and then he gets injured and has to go off. And although obviously we don't know the extent of the injury, based on what Roy Hodgson said, it could be a serious one and he could be out for a month, maybe even for the rest of the season. So we'll have to wait and see what the situation is there. But it obviously is quite disappointing to lose him when he's been playing so well recently. But obviously, hopefully, obviously we haven't got the biggest squad, but even if he is out for a few weeks or even till the end of the season, hopefully players will be able to come back or fill in his place. And much like what Bakary Sakho did when we had injuries, he was the one who stepped up. Hopefully, obviously I'm not hoping his injury is bad, but if it is bad, hopefully someone else can come into the squad and do what Bakary Sakho did in terms of stepping up and taking his role. But in terms of just summarising his whole performance, you know, his first half and second half, they weren't necessarily fantastic. And obviously, if you look back at the game as a whole and compare it to games recently, he wasn't up to his sort of usual sort of lively high tempo which he normally does. And obviously, it did look like quite a worrying injury. So although he wasn't playing that well, just to top off, which wasn't necessarily a great day for him, he obviously went off injured. So if it is a bad injury, then I wish you all the best. But hopefully Bakary Sakho, purely because of how well he's been playing recently, hopefully his injury isn't too serious. So personally for me, I think a 6 is a fair result. Now to move on to Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give a 5. Marked out of the game. Had his moments running off the ball as you'd expect, but not much impact in the second half. So Wilfried Zaha here, I've given him a 5. Much like James McArthur, when you consider how well these two have been playing this season, it was obviously another disappointing performance from Zaha, but also when you consider actually how well he's been playing since his injury, the last sort of 5-6 games he's actually been quite disappointing in the fact that he hasn't had as much influence as he has done in the past. And obviously some people have questioned the fact that maybe other teams have found him out, but personally for me, he's still got some influence and some attacking threat in the game. So personally for me, I think he's just going through a purple patch. So I don't think at the moment we should look too much into it, but if he does continue to have average performances when you consider how well he's been playing at the beginning of the season, then I do think it's time to time to get worried. But in terms of his performance here, obviously I've given him a 5, and the main reason for me, I think that he was disappointing in this game, is probably because he was marked out of the game. West Ham had loads of injuries, so they played with almost a back 6, and they parked the bus as well. And most of the time, whenever Wilfried Zaha was on the attack, there was almost certainly 3 players, even if not that, then 2 players on him at all times. So because he had 2 or 3 players marking him, he was basically marked out of the game and wasn't able to make an impact or even attack the ball, purely because there was no space to go because of the players around him. But obviously, despite that, obviously we know Wilf has got great ability and can get above these things, and obviously he had his moments like he normally does. He picks up the ball and runs with it, and that's what you'd expect from Wilf. But obviously it wasn't as good as it's been in past games, and much like a few players, his first half performance was alright, but in the second half he didn't really have that much impact, and some could argue his his second half performance was much worse than his one in the first. But in terms of his form this season, he obviously hasn't lived up to it in terms of carrying it on for the whole season, because he was playing so well when he came back from injury, obviously after having almost a month out, and so far in recent matches, and he hasn't really been able to get back to that standard. And obviously some could argue he looks a bit disinterested at times, but personally for me, I don't really think that's an issue. But obviously there was quite a lot of attention in terms of the opposition that have been done of late. So in terms of the opposition, they're now looking at Wilfried Zaha, knowing that they shouldn't give him space, they shouldn't give him time, don't give him yardage. And because of that, and because the opposition are now playing even more closer attention to him, is obviously not only limiting his chances, but also stopping him having an influence of the game. So although some could argue he looks a bit disinterested, I personally think he does alright in the game, but most of the time he's being marked out of the game, so you can't really expect him to be fantastic in the game if he's got 2 or 3 players around him marking him. But to be honest, obviously, yes, I've said he's quite disappointing and I've given him a 5, but like he always is, he was always a threat to the host. West Ham, obviously it's an injury, they've got so many injuries in their squad, but I still think that even though they were playing almost 6 defenders, I still thought that Zaha gave them plenty to think about when they were in possession. He would chase them down and try to get the ball off them, and obviously when we were on the attack, he would try and continue to be one of our main threats, so he'd try and look to carry the ball forward, but not much effect came from that, purely because of him being marked out of the game. So do comment below what you think about Zaha's performance, whether you do think I think I'm fair in giving him a 5, and also comment below what you think his recent turn down in form is about. So do comment below, I'll be interested to hear what you guys think about his performances of late. But personally for me, I think Zaha, a 5 for him, when you consider he was marked out of the game and didn't really have that chance to attack West Ham properly. I think that's a fair result. Now to move on to the striker Christian Benteke, who I am going to give a 6. Great movement, which was followed up by a bullet header from the big man to give the Eagles the lead. His overall play, hold-up play and headering was also very good. So Christian Benteke here, I've given him a 6, and much like his performances have been recently, in the fact that yes, he hasn't been scoring goals, his overall involvement in the game has been improving, and actually, if you look at his performances and takeaway goals, you probably could have given him 7s for his recent performances. In this game here, obviously he scored the goal, but actually his performances from the last few games carried on here, so he was obviously good in terms of his overall play. But just to add to that, and obviously just to add on to what was a good performance from him, he obviously went on to get the goal. Now obviously I could have given him a 7, the fact that because he had the influence and he also scored the goal. But personally for me, the fact that we didn't really attack West Ham as well as we did do in the first half, in the second half, that was slightly disappointing, and for me that's why I've given him a 6 as opposed to a 7. But in terms of his goal, I talked about in terms of Townsend making that fantastic run from the halfway line, putting that pin accuracy, a very accurate ball, let's say, into the area. Yes, that was great to see from Andros Townsend, but obviously the movement from obviously Benteke, he's a big lump, but the fact that he was able to make great movement in terms of getting past 2 or 3 defenders, and the fact that he was able to get that accuracy to get his header down and into the goal was obviously great to see. Obviously it gave us the lead within the first 24 minutes. And like I've said, I've seen replays of the goal, and I've seen a few people post it on Twitter. People criticise Benteke for not moving and the fact that he can only head balls. Yes, he obviously scored this goal with a header, but if you look back at before the goal, the fact that he ran from almost halfway through West Ham's own half, the fact that he ran that far was, zigzagging outside of defenders and midfielders. The fact that he done that, and the fact that he was able to find the space and also get on the end of that cross was also great to see. But in terms of his overall play, if you put the goal aside, I think his overall play, including sort of the hold-up play, obviously in terms of retaining possession and obviously headering the ball, if you take the goal out of that, I think that sort of overall play was great to see. And obviously people have criticised him recently for not scoring goals, but if you've been looking at his performances, they have been really good, and this was another good performance here. Now in terms of the goal, obviously he's only scored 2 goals this season, which isn't ideal for your striker, and hopefully with new signings coming in, hopefully that will put a bit of pressure on him to improve, or even if Alexander Lorloff plays alongside him, maybe that sort of partnership will allow them to both benefit off of each other, and maybe that partnership could be one that could help us going forth this season. But to be honest, it was a very, very welcome goal. We've expected Benteke to score another goal since the Leicester game. Obviously he got suspended after that, which sort of affected his form, but I still think that he's come back here, and hopefully now the fact that he scored the goal here, he can carry on this form in the next few weeks. And to be honest, looking at, like I've said already, obviously it's obviously we've waited a long time for him to score a goal, and now the fact that he's now got 2 goals in quite a short space of time, hopefully he can now sort of kick on now and get a few more goals towards the end of the season, and hopefully with the help of people like Rakip or other new signings we bring in, hopefully players like that who can play in behind him or alongside him, hopefully they can help him to get more goals this season. But overall for me, I think Christian Benteke, he fully deserves the 6 I've given him. If he had probably given a little bit more in the second half, I probably could have argued to give him a 7. But personally for me, a 6 for him. Obviously he scored a great goal, which obviously involved a great bullet header and obviously great movement. But overall, if you look at the game as a whole, I think his overall play in terms of hold-up play and headering was also very good, and hopefully this performance, including the goal, will be one of many more to come in the next few weeks. So Christian Benteke here, I think a 6 is a fair result. So now I'm just going to discuss the substitutes, or I say substitutes, there was only one sub in the game, and that was Yohan Cabaye. Obviously I'm going to give him a 6 because I think, much like most of the other players, he came off the bench, didn't necessarily make a massive impact, but was definitely doing a better job than say McArthur was in the midfield, and by bringing him on for Sakho, it gave us a little bit more control in the midfield because we had that extra man, and that seemed to make us a little bit more secure going forth in the game. But obviously he came on just before half time for the injured Sakho. Obviously I've already discussed Sakho's injury, hopefully it isn't as bad as originally thought. But obviously I thought he came on the pitch, Sakho wasn't necessarily having the best game other than a few sort of crosses and passes, so we brought on Cabaye. Yes, he didn't do too much in terms of the time he was on the pitch in the first half, and he didn't do very much overall in the second half, but I still thought that he gave us a little bit of class to the midfield. And like I've said already, yes, he gave us more numbers in the midfield, which meant we had more control of the game, but also with him coming on, with his passing ability and his ability to hold on to possession, I thought he gave us that little bit more control and class in terms of the second half performance. And to be honest, he was creating quite a lot of openings in the second half, so for that alone, the fact that Bakary Sakho wasn't really doing much in the first half, we bring on Cabaye. Yes, Cabaye didn't have the biggest impact, but the fact that he was still able to create a few openings and still have a little bit of influence was obviously great to see there. So personally for me, Yohan Cabaye, I do think he fully deserves the 6, and do comment below whether you think, because McArthur's played 2 consecutive games, not necessarily so great, whether you do think that Cabaye is now time for Cabaye to go back into the squad and take McArthur's place. So do comment below what you think, but personally for me, I think a 6 is a fair result for him. So now just to give you a small summary of the game, and in terms of what my views and what most fans' overall views are of the game. This is just another example of what respecting the point means, particularly when it's away from home, when you secure a point away from home. So although people will be frustrated in the fact that we gave away the penalty and the fact that we didn't score a few other goals, yes, that's disappointing, but I'd rather start drawing loads of games in a row to stay in the Premier League, rather than trying to go all out attack and end up losing games. And that's what we've done at the beginning of the season. We were so open defensively because we were trying to attack, whereas now Roy Hodgson, he's grinding out results, and hopefully by us grinding out results, whether it be home or away, hopefully that will secure our Premier League status. Now obviously when you consider that how well we didn't necessarily play fantastic in the first half, but when you consider we took the lead, obviously we got pegged back 2-1-1, but we will probably be disappointed that we obviously didn't build on that first half lead. So although West Ham went on to score later on, we had a few other chances after our first goal, which probably I'm quite disappointed really, and loads of other fans are, that we didn't take that opportunity to make it 2-0 and put the game to bed there. But really for me, like Sam Allardyce has said, like Roy Hodgson has said, respect the point is really important. I'd rather us get loads of draws in a row as opposed to trying to win all of our games, which when we can't necessarily do that, and obviously we go on to lose there. Now obviously the fact that there is enough in this Palace team, so we probably could have gone on to win the game in terms of seeing off this depleted Hammers side. We know they've got loads of injuries. We know they were playing 6 defenders almost. Yes, we knew it was going to be a tightly fought contest. Maybe we probably had slightly more quality than West Ham. Yes, we've both got injuries, but we probably got a little bit more quality in that starting 11. We probably, even though it was a tightly fought affair, we probably should have gone forth to win the game. But to be honest, yes, it wasn't the best result in terms of the draw, but it's the greatest reaction we could have expected from the defeat to Arsenal. So the game against Arsenal was really disappointing. So the fact that we've bounced back from that with not necessarily the best performance, but one that wasn't as bad as the Arsenal game, was obviously great to see as well. Now obviously it's getting to that sort of stage of the season now, and this is going to be my final bullet point of this section of the podcast. But it's now this part of the season where actually your performances don't matter. It's all about the points you get. So I'd rather us play terrible for loads of games in a row but still get loads of points and a occasional 3 points there, because if you keep these points ticking over towards the end of the season, then you're guaranteed safety. But I'd rather us, it doesn't matter if we play good. You don't stay in the league based on how well you play. So hopefully if we can carry on sort of grinding out results as well as playing well, but keep getting these points, keep ticking over, and hopefully that will help us to kick on this season. But obviously it's great to get another point, but that doesn't necessarily excuse what was a very poor second half from the visitors. So although obviously we're quite content with a point because it keeps this sort of run going that we're on at the minute in terms of our good form, yes, that keeps it ticking over, but probably it would have been better to get all the 3 points. Basically that's what I'm trying to say. It's quite difficult to put it into words, but yes, performances don't matter, and yes, it's alright just to get points ticking over, but when you consider how poor we were in the second half, there's no excuse for that, because if we had played well, or as well as we did in the first half for the second half, we probably would have gone on to get all 3 points. So now to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and all I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I've put forward for the award. Now obviously before I do that and obviously go on to explain why I've nominated these 4 players, I'm just going to give you the one omission that I put into the squad, or didn't put into this list. Now Luka Milivojevic, obviously he's a constant contender for the Man of the Match awards, purely because how well he plays consistently every week. But personally for me, even though the club put him on their official Man of the Match shortlist, personally for me, out of the 4 players that were on that shortlist, I had to remove one of them because I felt that one player who wasn't on there deserved to be on there. And personally for me, Milivojevic misses out, not necessarily because he had a bad performance, purely because I thought that the 4 players I'm going to go on to talk about, I just thought that they played even better. That's not to say that Luka played badly, it's just for me personally, I thought that these 4 players did play slightly better. But do comment below what you think, and whether you do think that actually Milivojevic should be on the shortlist. So in terms of the 4 nominations, they are James Tomkins, Patrick Van Aanholt, Andros Townsend and Christian Benteke. So in terms of Tomkins, if you take the penalty aside, I thought he was really solid in defence, and much like what I explained in the player ratings, I thought he read the game really well, whether that be when we were in possession in terms of playing from the back, or whether that be defending where he'd clear the ball, he'd clear his lines, or he'd make a header, he'd make a clearance. Whatever it was, I thought he'd done really well in the game. So other than the penalty, I thought he defended really well. In terms of Patrick Van Aanholt, I thought that both his attacking and defensive play was really good. He got that balance right. And in terms of helping us attack in the first half, he done a really great job. And in terms of getting back and defending, I thought he also done a great job there. And in terms of his positioning, loads of people criticise him for his positioning and his defensive skills. But actually, in this game here against West Ham, I thought that he got the positioning really right. Obviously, Andros Townsend obviously is the third player on the shortlist. I thought that because obviously Zaha wasn't playing well, up steps Townsend on the opposite flank. He's got to step up. I thought he'd done exactly that. He was a constant attacking threat. And I think that because there were three players marking Wilf on one wing, it obviously meant that that Townsend had so much space out on the other flank, which obviously meant that he could set up Benteke for the goal. So although Townsend was a constant attacking threat, add on to that the fact that he made a fantastic run from the halfway line, obviously fantastic cross from the byline to get the ball to Benteke, and the fact that he was obviously able to put that in the right position to get the assist for Benteke's goal was obviously great to see as well. So although someone like Milivojevic, for example, yes, he played well defensively, but personally for me, the likes of Townsend just go above here purely because they got the assist. Same could be said for Van Aanholt, the fact that he had slightly better positioning and he was actually being good both offensively and defensively. And Tomkins, for me, it's probably between Milivojevic and Tomkins, who you could argue should be in the shortlist. But personally for me, because of that tackle on Hernandez that Tomkins made in the first half, and the fact that he was overall solid throughout the whole game, other than the penalty, for me, that's why he deserves to be on there. And obviously our final player, our fourth player, is Christian Benteke. Now obviously he scored the goal, which was obviously great. Only his second goal of the season, but it's great to see him scoring again. But overall, I think his play looked really great. His link-up play in terms of getting other players involved and actually picking up the ball from deep was very good. And although people criticise him for his work rate, it was very good in this game. His hold-up play was also very good, as well as obviously him winning all of the headers. So not only was he holding up the ball, getting others involved, as well as linking up the midfield to the attack, but also obviously Townsend puts in that delicious cross, pinpoint for him. And obviously Benteke, great bullet header, gets it in the goal. A great goal to score there. So not only did he score the goal, but his overall play before and after the goal was pretty good as well. But for me, I think, it's pretty hard to pick one, when you don't necessarily have a fantastic performance, and when one player in particular doesn't stand out, it's pretty hard to pick a player who you could say was the outstanding player for me. But personally for me, I'm going to give it to Andros Townsend. So congratulations, Andros. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was another solid performance from you. But the main reason I've given it to him above the likes of Benteke, Van Aanholt, Tomkins, and obviously Milivojevic, who missed out on the shortlist, is purely because the fact that he was a constant attacking threat, so he was looking to win the game for us, looking to create chances, but also the fact that he was obviously got the assist for the goal. And not only because he got an assist because he crossed the ball, the way that it started, so the build-up play to that in terms of picking up the ball from Milivojevic on the halfway line, driving forward, getting in behind, using his pace, and putting the cross with such great accuracy. Personally for me, that is one of the reasons, or that is the main reason why I've put him above there. Yes, Benteke scored, but Townsend was the architect for that chance, and personally for me, I think that's why he does deserve to win this week's Man of the Match award. But do comment below with your opinions. Do you agree with me giving Andros Townsend the award? And also comment below with your Man of the Match if you do disagree. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson and Christian Benteke following the game.
Christian, 1-1 draw today. Are you pleased with the point?
Yeah, I will say because to be fair, we didn't have a great first half, I would say. Even if we managed to score, and then they just came back just before the half-time. Second half, we tried to have more composure on the ball, but we just couldn't find the last passes at the end during the second half.
And for you personally, I'm guessing you're pretty pleased to be on the score sheet.
Yeah, I'm pleased because these last few weeks I felt like I was close to score, but I just couldn't score. And today it's a great feeling to score again, but I will prefer to get these 3 points. Sorry.
Let's just talk about that move. It was great ball in from Andros, wasn't it? Just where you want it.
Yeah, it's like we've been practicing a lot during this week, and I know and he knows where to put the ball, and I was in the right place in the right time.
Unfortunately, saw Bakary Sakho go off injured. Did that affect the team at all, losing him?
Yeah, to be fair, yeah, because we all know that Bakary was in a great form, and hopefully it's not too bad.
Very tight game today. Was 1-1 a fair result?
I think it probably was. I thought it was good to take the lead, but to be fair, we hadn't dominated to any great extent when we took the lead, so it came, if not out of the blue, it came fortuitously. Of course, they equalised before half time, and I think that they'd shown enough in that first half to merit an equalising goal. And I didn't think we were anywhere near our best in the first half. But I thought second half we played much better. I thought when Johan came on and we played with the three central midfield players, we started to establish control. I thought our passing was much better. And all that was lacking in the second half, really, unfortunately, was that final ball in the last part of the field, that final pass, that final cross. We got into positions to deliver it, but we couldn't quite find our men in that important area of the field when we needed it. But there were some very promising signs.
It's good to see Christian on the score sheet. It was a great ball in from Andros as well, wasn't it? A good move.
Yeah, it was. And I thought in the second half we got into those sort of positions wide where I was expecting the cross to come or expecting the last little pass to put us in for a goal, but we never quite made it. But it's good to see that we're getting there. And I thought in particular the way we controlled the second half, there was lots of attacks which we sustained and never let them get back at us, and I thought their chances in the second half were few and far between too.
And finally, their goal came just after Bakary Sakho got injured. Do we know how bad that one is yet?
Doesn't look good. He'll have a scan tomorrow, but the trouble with the medical people these days, they're so good that when they tell you it doesn't look good and it could be quite serious, it's very rare that you get the good news that they got it wrong. So I fear the worst. It certainly doesn't look positive at this moment in time, and I suppose that any positivity we can take from getting a good point from the game has once again been cancelled out by the fact it's a very costly point, because it might have cost us a player who's in good form and what's more plays in a part of the field, i.e. in attack, where we literally don't have too many options.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson and Christian Benteke had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against West Ham. But make sure to come back next week for a post-match review of the game against Newcastle. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.